This video is going to run you through the eye, which is the first half of chapter 15. It starts with define the eye, but let's face it, you guys all know where your eye is and what your eye is supposed to do. So what I'm going to focus on here is the difference between what most people think their eye does and what it actually does. Most people think that their eyes help them see everything in the world around them, and that's partially true. But what's important for you to understand is your eyes are really just reporting where is light, what is the wavelength of light. It is your brain's job to interpret that information and turn it into a picture that actually makes sense. So your eyes would be useless if it were not for the brain to make sense of what the eyes are seeing all the time. Let's see, after that, we get into words that, again, you guys should know what they are. Y'all know what your eyebrows are. Palpebra is just the fancy word for your eyelids. You, of course, do have two, an upper and a lower, or a superior and then an inferior palpebra. They blink to move tears across and then to help protect the eye itself. The eyelashes are at the inferior edge of the superior palpebra and then the superior edge of the inferior palpebra, and they really just help keep wind-blown debris from getting into your eyes. Tarsal gland is present in the upper eyelid up here. It's not shown in this picture. It's a modified sebaceous gland, and it produces oil that helps to lubricate the eye, which that's what your sentence says up here, so you're good with that. Chalazion is an inflammation of that gland. Now, a lot of people confuse a chalazion with a stye, and so I want to point out, in addition to the tarsal gland, you do also have typical sebaceous glands that are going to be attached to the eyelashes on both upper and the lower surface. If you get inflammation in those, that's just a stye. If it's the tarsal gland, though, that's a chalazion. They can have different sources. Treatment is a little bit different for each one of these, and so that's why it's important you recognize chalazion versus stye up over here on this side. Let's see. Next up, conjunctiva. If you look at the surface of the eye here in this picture, there's this very thin membrane that covers the surface. That's the conjunctiva. The conjunctiva does have a blood supply, and that's going to be important for us because the cornea below it, deep to it, does not have a blood supply, and so it's going to help provide nutrients to the cornea of the eye. Another thing that I like to mention at this point, specifically for contact lens wearers or people who could wear contact lenses but don't. A lot of times when they choose not to, it's because they've heard stories about contact lenses that roll all the way back around to the back of the eye. Notice that that can't happen. The conjunctiva wraps back around the back side of the eyelid, and so the contact can't actually come all the way back here unless it rips through there, which that's very unlikely to happen. And so it can roll back a ways, but it can't go all the way back around to the back of the eye and then be lost forever. Next, conjunctivitis is inflammation of the conjunctiva. If it's the result of bacteria, they tend to call that pink eye because the eye does get very red, and a lot of times it produces a lot of dischargy materials, and so that's what you're seeing in both of these pictures is conjunctivitis. The lacrimal gland is what produces the actual tears for the eye. Notice that it's on the medial aspect of, I said medial, it's on the lateral aspect, pardon me, of each eye. When it produces the tears, they come in on the lateral side, and then blinking action will move them medially. From here, there's some canals that are going to drain it into the nasolacrimal duct, which is going to come back to us here in just a second. For the tears, they contain all of those things. Yes, it is mostly salt water, but there's also mucus and antibodies, which are a component of the immune system, and then lysozyme, which I'm going to come back to here in just a second. Coming back to the nasolacrimal duct, it is the duct that drains the tears from the eyes into the nasal cavity. It's the reason why when you cry, you get a runny nose. It's also why sometimes if you get a sinus infection or any kind of rhinitis, it can spread up that and then affect the eyes as well, so your eyes can get goopy when you have a head cold. So it's just a connection between those two things. Going back to lysozyme now, lysozyme is an antimicrobial chemical that you produce for yourself. It works a lot like penicillin does. It helps to break down the cell wall of certain bacteria. It actually works fairly well because if you think about it, your eyes are exposed to bacteria all day, every day, and yet you rarely get bacterial infections in the eye, so you can thank lysozyme for that. It does a really good job. Next, your extrinsic eye muscles. You have 6 of them. The names are actually really simple if you remember your directional terms. Also keep in mind rectus means straight and oblique means curved. So you have the superior rectus on the top, inferior rectus on the bottom, lateral rectus on the outside edge, medial rectus on the inside edge. It's not labeled in this picture though. You also have an inferior oblique that wraps around the bottom of the eye, and then a superior oblique that goes through that trochlea that we talked about briefly back in the cranial nerves chapter. Each one of those pulls the eye in a specific direction so that you're going to be able to see things, whether they're on the right side of you or the left side of you. Next up, sometimes those muscles aren't contracting like they're supposed to, or maybe they're weaker on one side compared to the other side. That can result in a couple of conditions, and we're going to start with diplopia. Some people call this a lazy eye when a person has it, and what it means is the person can't really control where the eye goes at any given time. The eyes just aren't coordinated as they move. The other option is strabismus, and in this one the two eyes converge medially towards the nose, so we would call that cross-eyed in the colloquial term. Either one of these conditions, what I would recommend is start with exercises to try to strengthen the eye, like it says down here in this particular sentence. The other option is there are surgeries to try to fix these. I'm just a proponent of trying to do exercise prior to having somebody cut into, because all surgeries have a risk, and so I would say start with exercises before you move to that. Next up. 3 layers that form the wall of the eyeball, and here's where we're going to start flipping back and forth between slides. First layer is the fibrous layer, and get what it says in this sentence for this. The fibrous layer consists of the sclera in the back, which is the white part of the eye, and the cornea in the front. Don't write those down. They're not number 2 and number 3. We're going to come back to those here in just a minute. The other important thing for you guys to have about the fibrous layer is that green word. This is avascular. None of this layer has a blood supply. That's going to be super helpful for us, especially as we get to the cornea itself. We do have vascular layers just deep to this and just superficial to this, and so it's got plenty of nutrients coming and going, but this layer itself is avascular. Okay, next layer for you guys to write down, number 2, is the vascular layer. And as the name implies, this is the layer that has most of the blood supply coming into the eye. In the picture, it's all of this red stuff. Now, the vascular layer also has several parts. Don't write this down. We're going to come back to it later on. You have the choroid in the back. Now, when you guys dissected an eyeball in the lab, this was the black part that had the shiny blue because sheep have night vision. We don't get that shiny layer, but we do have that choroid that goes all the way around the back. Towards the front of the eye, the choroid thickens and it becomes a muscular layer as well. And so we have the ciliary body that's attached through suspensory ligaments to the lens. That's going to control the size and shape of the lens to help you focus light. That's still part of this vascular layer, the ciliary body is. And then in front of that, you have the iris, which controls the size of the pupil, which is that black hole that you have that leads you back to the back of the eye. So all of that makes up the vascular layer. Third and final layer for you guys to write down, I would actually prefer that you call it the neural layer, but your book calls it the inner layer. This is the innermost layer or the deepest layer to the eye. It's the yellow in the picture up here. That's the retina, and we're going to come back around to that here in just a little bit. All right, now for define or list the function, we're going to come back and start over. The sclera is part of the fibrous layer. It is the white part of the eye. It's very dense connective tissue, and it does help to protect and shape the eyeball. So this bottom sentence, actually these bottom 2 sentences are the good ones to get for this. Remember when you dissected the eye, how hard it was to put a scalpel or scissors through that. It is a very dense connective tissue, and so that's a very strong layer. To the front of that, you have the cornea. It is called the window to the eye, and that's because it is clear. No blood vessels running through it, and that can be relevant for a video that I show you when we actually go to class about this one. The job of the cornea is to let the light through so that it can go through the pupil, the lens, and then eventually hit the retina of the eye. The choroid, its job is to be an especially dark layer to absorb light so it doesn't bounce around inside the eye and make your vision fuzzy. The ciliary body, I already mentioned, it controls the size and shape of the lens, so it helps you focus light because it controls the lens. The pupil, that might have been on the last slide, the pupil is a hole. It's really hard to point at a hole, but they put the bracket around it here in this picture. The pupil is just the hole in the middle of a concentric ring of muscle called the iris. The iris is part of the vascular layer back here. It's the colored part of your eye. Like if you have blue eyes, it's because your iris is blue, and its only job is to control the size and shape of the pupil. And so that's the iris's job. Next up, the retina. You need to know it contains the photoreceptors, which are rods and cones. You need to know that photoreceptors are the cells that can respond to light energy and start a graded potential. You also need to know there's 2 types, rods and cones. We're going to come back to those here in just a second. All right, I'm going to come back to this picture for a sec. All over the retina, you have rods basically everywhere. Most of your cones are focused in this one general area right here. There is one spot, however, at the back of the eye that does not contain rods or cones. Now what's important for you to understand is if there are no rods and cones, that means the eye cannot sense light in that one place. So the place where you have no rods and cones and cannot sense light, it's called the optic disc, and it's this whole region right through here. Notice that your book even in parentheses calls it the blind spot. That's because you can form no image of anything that's hitting that particular spot of your eye. We're going to do a test for that in lecture, so you're going to be able to see what I'm talking about when I'm talking about your blind spot. Okay, next, rods. You need to know they are super sensitive to light. Even if there's only a tiny amount of light, they can detect it. The problem with rods, though, is they can't differentiate between different wavelengths, so they can only see things in shades of gray, black, white, gray. Cones, on the other hand, have to have bright light in order to work. They are not as sensitive as the rods are. However, they can differentiate between the different wavelengths of light, so cones are for color. So, in short, rods are for black and white vision, cones are for color vision. Next up, the macula is what you have next. It's this whole circular kind of dark spot that you have going on right here. If you've ever heard of macular degeneration, it means this part of the retina is degenerating and it's not working like it's supposed to anymore. Right in the middle of the macula lutea, you have the even darker spot right here in the center that's called the fovea centralis, which in Latin means the central focal point. That is where your lens tries to focus the light. It's where most of the cones are actually present in your eye to help give you the best, crispest, clearest picture that you can possibly see. And so you want your fovea to be working exactly like it's supposed to, and you want your lens to be focusing the light right dead on that spot so that you're going to be able to see everything. After that, you have some things that we're going to be doing in class, and then you have the picture of the eyeball to actually label, and it's this one right here. We've pretty much gone over everything in it, but just one more time, you have 3 layers. You have the fibrous layer, the vascular layer, and then the neural or the inner layer. The fibrous layer consists of the sclera to the back, which is white, and then the cornea to the front, which is clear. The vascular layer consists of the choroid in the back, the ciliary body, which controls the lens, and then the iris, which controls the pupil. And then the inner layer, the neural layer, is the retina, which is where your rods and cones are. So this is the part of the eye, specifically the macula and the fovea centralis is the part of the eye where you want your picture to be so that you can send the image to the brain, and then the brain can interpret that picture. And that information coming from the eye is going to go through the optic nerve to get back there eventually. Next up, some problems that can happen with the eye. Maybe they were going to be back here. Just checking to see because I haven't updated my stuff in a long, long time. All right, going to go way back. Retinal detachment is exactly what it sounds like. The retina detaches. Now, one of the things that probably you noticed when you were in lab is the retina is not attached by fibers to the choroid. The only thing that holds it in place is the pressure from the vitreous humor. So if you hit your head hard enough, like let's say in a car accident, it's possible for the retina to actually slip. And when it does that, it separates it from a lot of its blood supply in the vascular layer back behind. So part of the retina is going to actually start to die. They can go in surgically and put it back into place, but the more they have to do that, the more scar tissue develops, and so that can be a bad thing. But they can fix it at least a couple times. Vitreous humor, I just mentioned a second ago. I'm not sure if I have that on a slide. Ooh, I do. So here are the things that I want you to know for the vitreous humor. One of my instructors way back when told me that you never create more vitreous humor. You're born with all you're ever going to have. So if you lose it, you're screwed because you can't make any more of it. I really should try to find out whether or not that's true, but it's something that's always stuck with me is if you lose that, there's nothing that we can do for you. It's all of this jelly stuff towards the back. All right. Aqueous humor is in the anterior compartment of the eye, which is the lens to the front. Where the vitreous humor is behind holding the retina up in place, the aqueous humor circulates through the whole anterior compartment and it helps to nourish the posterior surface of the cornea and then the anterior surface of the lens. You create more aqueous humor every day and then you drain it, through a little canal. And so you make it, you drain it, and so you're keeping homeostatic for the most part when it comes to pressure inside the inner eye. If that pressure starts to build up, that's when the disease glaucoma can occur. What's happening here is either the person is producing too much of the fluid faster than it can be drained, or maybe the canal that it's supposed to drain through has gotten clogged and so it can't drain correctly anymore. That pressure starts to push the lens back. The lens puts pressure on the vitreous humor, and then that pressure starts to kill the retina, and so glaucoma will lead to blindness if it's not treated. Personally, my grandmother had glaucoma for a really long time. They put her on some special eye drops, and she kept her vision for her whole life until the day she died. She could still see. And so this is why it's so important to go get that puff test, where they puff the air into your eye and tell you not to blink. Because if they find out you have it, they can keep you with sight for a long period of time. If you wait until symptoms develop, the retina that has died is dead. There's nothing you can do for it at that point. And so you want to catch it early. Okay. Another disease of the eye is cataracts, and this is when the lens itself starts to become cloudy. It's very typical as you get older because the more UV exposure you get, the more cloudy the lens is going to get. Also, smokers are way more likely to develop cataracts, so there's another reason to quit smoking right there. Cataracts is relatively easy to treat. It's a surgical fix. They'll go in and remove that lens and then put a new plastic lens in, and I'll show you the video for that in lecture. Next thing that you guys have is trace the pathway of light through the eye. I'm not sure if I have that on the slide. Oh, I do. Okay, so right here, get what it says as it goes through there. You can always pause the video if you want to. All right. Next terms that we have, inotropic means that a person has normal vision, that is 20/20 vision. The numbers 20/20 mean you can see a size 20 letter from 20 feet away. And so it's telling you you can see what you're supposed to be able to see. Accommodation. Your eyes are built to see things essentially 20 feet away or farther. So your eyes naturally focus on things that are far away, at least they used to. Nowadays with computer screens and books and things, we're finding people that are more myopic than they used to be, but I'm going to start with, let's say you have a normal vision. Accommodation is everything you have to do to switch your eyes from there, I normally want to see 20 feet away, to I'm reading a book that's only 2 feet away from my face. And in order to do that, you have to converge both of your eyes immediately. In other words, you become slightly cross-eyed. You usually are going to be tinkering with your pupil just a little bit. You're going to have to change the shape of the lens to refocus everything. All of that work and change, that's accommodation. One of the things that sucks about getting older is as you get older, accommodation gets more difficult because the lens gets more firm and it's harder for you to change the lens as it changes the shape of the lens as you get older. Let's see, Next up you have presbyopia. That's what I was just talking about. Definition is up there. Myopia is what you have next. This is what's usually called nearsighted. What happens here, I'm going to flip back to a picture for just a second. In a myopic eye, the lens is focusing the light in front of the fovea centralis. So the light actually bends past the point, and then you get a blurry image on the fovea. So that's what's happening for a person who's myopic. Your next word was hyperopic, and I'll go back to the definition here in just a second, but you have the exact opposite problem. Now the lens is trying to focus the light behind the fovea centralis, and so once again the image is blurry when it's right over that spot. So hyperopic is farsighted, myopic is nearsighted, and it's because the lens isn't focusing the light in exactly the right place. Now, sometimes those two conditions happen because the shape of the eyeball is not correct. It's not the sphere that it's supposed to be, or in the case of the cornea, the slightly curved ovally sort of thing. That condition is called astigmatism, and that's all one word. It's not astigmatism, it's astigmatism. Essentially, for astigmatism, what it amounts to is if you get glasses or contacts, they're going to have to be specially ground down for the shape of your eye. So you're going to notice those things cost more, but we can still fix your vision if you have astigmatism. Colorblindness means that either cones aren't working correctly or the person flat out didn't make the cones that they were supposed to make, and as a result, there are certain colors that they cannot see. One of the most common forms of colorblindness is red-green colorblindness, and that particular type is a sex-linked recessive genetic condition, which means men are more likely to get it than women. This little square down here, if you notice there is a red square inside of this box. If you can't see it, you might be red-green colorblind. There's also a yellow circle off over here that tests for a different form of colorblindness, but there are different kinds. What's interesting about colorblindness, and there's another video that I will show in class about this one, is there are now some new glasses that are out on the market that can help some forms of colorblindness and help them see colors that they couldn't see in the past. Okay. Next, super briefly, location of taste and smell receptors. Taste receptors are primarily on the tongue. Smell receptors are at the olfactory epithelium and the top of the nasal cavity. Olfaction is your sense of smell. Gustation is your sense of taste. Right now they're saying that we can taste 5 basic tastes. It used to be 4. Now there are 5. Umami was added. And umami is, to me, best typified as soy sauce is umami, but it gives you beef as an example in the textbook. Oh, yeah, no, one more term that I wanted to get to, and that's anosmia. Anosmia is, like there used to be a Febreze commercial that would talk about your nose blind. That's anosmia. It means you don't have your sense of smell for some reason. That's where this video is going to stop.